my dear friends and net aspirants, welcome back to High Point again. Today we are going to learn about T.S. Eliot's very famous essay, and which is known as the manifesto, unofficial manifesto of T.S. Eliot, which is titled as Tradition and Individual Talent. This is one of the major essays related to literary theory and criticism in the 20th century. Okay, so I know most of you, all of us had this particular essay in our MA syllabus, so it's a must that you study study this essay if you are studying literature, and also if you are writing NTA UGC NET JRF exam too. So if you are interested in, stay tuned and let's begin our video soon. Before that, let me introduce the other platforms that I am present. I have an Instagram page where I'm sharing lot of free materials in the form of study cards, reels, small videos, carousels and many more. So if you are interested and if you are there in Instagram too, you can follow me in there. My ID is right here. You can search in this ID and find me and follow me if you are interested after seeing my page. And if you want to join a WhatsApp group in which I am sharing news and updates related to NTA, UGC NET and some study materials along with the daily quiz question and answer, then obviously you can go to the description box and click the link and join. Or if not, you can message me or call me in this number, WhatsApp me in this number. I will be glad to share the link, and you and your friends, those who are interested, can also join. So and also more than that, we have a website known as www.highpoint.in, in which we have given 900 plus audio lectures along with 300 plus downloadable study materials in the form of PDF study materials, and also set of previous and practice question paper. Question paper, every one of that previous questions you can find there, and also you can attempt them live in the website and know your mark once you submit your responses. So if you are interested, come to the website and log in for the free trial and see what we have provided there. And if you are interested, join the courses. If you are interested in joining the courses, after joining them, you will get two bonuses from us. First one is weekly test in every Saturdays. Second one is the personalized study guidelines from our side according to your schedules and your preferences of topics. Okay, we will suggest something that will make you to be consistent in your study. So if you follow that. Okay, let's begin today's topic, which is about tradition and individual talent. Okay, let's go to a brief session of introduction about the essay. The author is T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot belongs to modern era of English literature, and he has published his Wasteland and in the year 1922. This year is too famous and too important because James Joyce came up with Ulysses in the same year, as well as Virginia Woolf came up with Jacob's Room in the same year 1922. So all these things you must have familiar. And it was first published in the Egoist. So there is a journal known as the Egoist. It was first published in there, and George Watson, another critic, he made a statement about this particular essay. He called it as Eliot's essay is a statement of an attitude. So what is Eliot's attitude towards literature and criticism, poetic creation and all? That is quite visible in this particular essay, as his attitude is revealed in here. And it is also known as an official manifesto of Eliot's criticism. So what type of critic that he is, and his unofficial and it is known as unofficial manifesto of Eliot's criticism. So don't forget these simple facts related to tradition and individual talent. Now let's, without wasting any further time, let's move on to critical summary of the essay. So begins by talking about the tradition and the critical labor. So, labor in the sense that if you are a literary person, if you are a poet, you have to go through a certain kind of labor of knowing the whole history of English literature. It's not that you know all about the authors and all, no, like we are studying for NTA, no. It's not like that, but you need to have a sensibility about the tradition that is there. And tradition is not something that we imitate the, and by knowing tradition doesn't mean that the poet should imitate that particular knowledge of tradition and particular authors that is there in the tradition in their works. But basically you should have a, if as a literary person, if you are, you should have a sense of tradition, you should have a knowledge of tradition, what all things were there, what are the traditions and our trends in our history as far as literature is concerned. And that is the critical labor as a as a poet you have to possess. Eliot says we praise a poet or writer for their antiquity. Who else begins this essay like this? See, Dr. Johnson also begins preface to Shakespeare as praising antique poets, antique writers. So he says that we often do, and we have a tendency that the writers and poets we are praising for their antiquity, because they are ancient poets, because they belong to past, because they belong to tradition. We have a tendency for praising a poet and writer for their antiquity, and we try to find out the most unique part of a literary work to give value to the author. Another thing that we are doing that whether it is, if it is a new poet, if it is a new writer, you will try to, if you are a critic, you will find and you will try to find most unique and individual kind of part in his or her literary work, and for creating such novel and unique part in that literary work, you will give value to that author. Okay, but we often find out that the most individual parts in their work may be those in which the dead poets asserted their presence. So, but often you can find in literary works that the most individual work, the most individual part of the work that you are searching for, in that most individual part itself, in that work, there will be the dead poets will assert their presence. That means you are searching for something very novel and individual that is created uniquely by that author. But when you find that individual part, if you look closely, you can see that the dead poets, that means the antique poets, the traditional poets, they will assert their presence very well in that individual parts of his or her work that you are searching for. The best poet derives from the past poets. That means that if you don't know anything related to the tradition, if you don't have a sense of tradition, if you don't know how tradition works, how this line of literature is continuing throughout, then you are not a good poet. You cannot produce a best work of yourself. So the best poet, who is a best poet? A best poet derives from the past poet, who knows about the traditional poets, classical poets, or the past poets, basically antique poets, and by knowing them and doing a clever imitation of them, and by following the tradition of the antique poets, you can be a best poet. Tradition cannot be inherited. It's a matter of wide significance rather than mere repetition. See, if your father is a great poet, that doesn't mean that you will inherit that tradition, that sense of tradition into you, just like other qualities. But it is a matter of wide significance rather than mere repetition. So this was I telling in the initial parts, like it's not by knowing tradition. What Eliot is saying, that Eliot is not asking you to merely repeat whatever the past poet has already said, or merely just copy them down and copy them down into a new style. No, it's not that, because it is of wide significance, that you should know tradition in a more sensible manner, that you need to know what type of tradition was there in English literature, and that is more important. And he doesn't propagate any mere repetition or imitation of old poets in here, while he says that you should know the sense of you should have a tradition for you should have a sense for tradition. And tradition rightly can be understood only through great labor. So this was the great labor and critical labor that he was referring initially, that if you want to know about tradition, not only about the writers and their works, and if you want to know and if you want to have a true sense of tradition, what was the tradition that we had as far as literature is concerned, then it can only be understood through a great labor, a critical labor. Okay, it's related to our own labor and how passionately that we want to have this traditional sensibility. Then only you can become a great poet, then only you can create great poetry too, according to TS Eliot. To understand tradition, one need a great historical sense. That means, what all people were there in the history and what are their contribution, not only the titles of their works, but what contribution they really made to the literary tradition. So this will come out, this will happen only if you want to understand this type of a tradition. Then you need to have a historical sense. Okay, so the tradition and history, all these things belong to past only, right? So in order to understand the tradition about the past poets, you have to understand the you must have a great historical sense. The historical sense will help the poet to write not merely this with his generation, but with a feeling of the whole literature of Europe from Homer. So if you have a historical sense and a great traditional sensibility too, how come that will help you as a literary person? So it will enable you to write. So historical sense will help and enable the poet to write in a way that it will enable you to write with your own generation, and at the same time with a feeling that you belong to the whole literature of Europe, which is from Homer. That means that you are not an individual that stands alone as the best poet, but you actually fall in a great stream of European literature. Okay, so once you produce a work, you will be counted as someone who belongs to the great stream of literature of Europe, which is from Homer, which can be traced back to Homer. So in that way, with these two in writing with these two sensibilities, historical sense will help you with, like you can write along with your generation, but also you can also write with a feeling that the whole literature of I belong to the whole literature of Europe from Homer. A poet or no artist of any sort has his complete meaning alone. So he says that no poet or no artist possesses a complete meaning alone. You cannot produce something that that is entirely novel. That is entirely novel. That means you cannot entirely produce a very novel idea, a novel meaning inside your work that was created by you yourself for the first time. No, it's like no poet fully contains the entire meaning alone. See, if you look at the symbols and images that artists are using in their works, you can understand this thing. See, a rose is always referred as a symbol of love. If a character is giving a rose to his beloved, then that means that signifies love. And if you in many sense, many images are like that, traditional images are like that, and images and meanings and meaning of any kind of sort, it's not that you will stand alone as a poet or as an artist and you will create your own complete meaning alone. That is not possible. You are indebted to somewhat to your tradition, even if you are ready to accept it or not, but still you will have an indebted, you are indebted to that history and that great tradition that you are belonging to. Okay, you have to set him against the past poets. So if you're evaluating a poet, what you will do, you cannot evaluate that person alone, because he cannot create a meaning of himself or herself alone, right? So you have to set him or her, you have to set that poet against the past poet, then only you will, by comparing the past poet and the contemporary poets, only then you will arrive at the greatness of the past poets as well as the greatness of the contemporary poets. Because any poet or any artist cannot produce meaning, complete meaning, his or himself or herself. That means it's not that the poet will be fully imitating the traditional poets, no, but for many meanings that he or she is produced in his work, you can find that they are indebted to their past traditional poets or their tradition, their own tradition. If good tradition is to be kept up, then what is worth preserving will be preserved, and what calls for rejection will be rejected. It's not that we have certain poets and we are giving veneration for certain poets of antiquity, but it's not that only these people were in the past times and we are venerating only them. No, there were hundreds of poets, there were thousands of poets, but we are not remembering all of them, but we actually preserved. As time passed, people were looking back, and whatever they saw as worthy, they preserved all of them, and whatever need to be rejected, they also got rejected. The same will happen when you compare a poet with the traditional or past poets. If he need to be preserved, he or she or her work or his work will get preserved. If not, that will get rejected. It's not happen with the it not only will happen with the present poet, but it will in a way change and modify the past works too. It will influence the way how we are seeing the past, our tradition too. Okay, so it's a kind of give and take policy between the past, our tradition, and whatever going contemporarily in here in this tradition. The European mind is much more important than the poet's private mind. See, if you could see the 20th century, if you could see the 19th century, criticism was also like this. People were not generally regarding or labeling any work as good or bad, but criticism was happening in such a way that you should a critic will come and read, and he will share his own personal understanding, personal enjoyment about that work when he was reading that work to the readers, and he won't in a strict sense evaluate that work. So he says, and in 19th century we can see that there was a general idea that people were started to talk about their private feelings, their own emotions. See, Wordsworth itself, in the beginning of the 18th century, he proclaimed and defined poetry as the continuous and spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility. So it's not about private men. So as far as literature is concerned, European mind means European sensibility as far as literature is concerned is more important than the poet's private mind. So whenever you are writing a poetry, you are not alone creating that meaning inside your poetry, but you are taking too much from the past writers, and you have got inspired from the past poets, and then only you are creating poets. Then only you are creating meanings in your poetry. So your own private mind is important. Its presence should be there, that we will see later what he is telling about poet's private mind. But what is more important while creating a poetry is that the European mind, that means the tradition, literary tradition of of Europe with a historical sense. Okay, a poet is indebted to the past, and no poet could escape the influence of the past poets. So like I said just now, see, if you are a poet or if you are an artist, you are too much indebted to the past. It's not that you alone created any meanings in your works, but there will be novel ideas, there will be individual passages as well, but in those individual passages also we can see that the past poets are asserting in a very well manner. So you cannot escape from the influence of the past just like that, even though you accept it or reject it. The new literature should conform to the existing order of the literature. That means there is a stream of literature. There is a stream of tradition. You have to be conformity. You have to be in conformity while you are writing and while you are creating new component in literature. Otherwise it will lack this kind of historical sensibility or traditional sensibility in your work, and you are not acknowledging the past or tradition of Europe, and in which your own personal mind is given important rather than European mind, and that is not an acceptable thing in creating a good literature. So literature should go in conformity with the existing order of literature. This doesn't mean that you have to imitate whatever, you have to only imitate whatever there in the past, given by the past authors. Okay, this fitting to the pattern is the test that will determine the value of literary piece. If you are fitting to the patterns of European mind as far as literature is concerned, or traditional pattern of literature of Europe, then that is a test, that is kind of an exam, that is a test that will determine your value, I mean your value as an artist, as well as the value of your literary piece. Not only the past directed by the past, but also the past has to be altered by the present. I already made this point. It's not that always you will compare yourself, your work with the past writers, and you will be, while creating a literary piece, you will be directed by the past or antique writers and the tradition. But it also means, by fitting into this pattern means, and having a traditional idea and having a traditional sensibility means that though the past has to be altered by the present. So our viewpoint, the way we are seeing the past, the tradition will also get altered and changed by the present way of treating, or present way of fitting into that past or traditional pattern. Okay, so it will modify each other. The past will direct and modify the present, and at the same time the past will got altered by the present. Okay, the critic cannot and should not judge works of art literature by the outmoded standards of the dead poets and critics. So he is not asking you to evaluate any literature with the outdated standards of criticism or that was put forwarded by dead poets, but you have to, you can establish some sort of novelty. There is no kind of restriction for that, but it's not that when Eliot is saying that you have to imitate, you have to fall under the pattern, you have to fit very well to the pattern of the tradition and all. He doesn't mean that you have to imitate the same pattern that was there in the past and all, but it's like there is a stream that is going on. Your literature, even it is new, like new kind of literature, but still it should fit to that stream, that pattern. Okay, the past is not an object of nostalgic retrospect. So here he makes this point even clear that what is meant by tradition or the past. It's not an object that we nostalgically think about it. We will nostalgically think back and venerate the poets. Not only that, it is rather a continuing tradition. It's not that somewhat struck tradition. We are actually following this tradition. We are continuously following tradition, and the tradition is getting tradition itself, it is not struck somewhere, it is continuing. That means more than it is not something belongs to only to the history, but it is there, present there when we create a literary piece. Okay, more than thinking about in a nostalgic retrospect, you have to know how to, you have to know about the continuing tradition that we have, which is very much alive, and you have to present and represent this tradition in the future through your literature. It is to this continuing tradition that we are bound to conform. So this, not to a dead tradition, not to a past tradition with a nostalgic respect that we need to conform to that tradition, but since it is continuing tradition, since we are producing literature in our European, with European mind, and we are producing literature, and many more great poets also are there in this greater tradition, and it is very much alive tradition, continuing tradition, and to that alive and continuing tradition we need to bound to, we all are bound to conform. Now he tells about the impersonality of art. Okay, so this is another important thing that he says, another important concept that he shares in his essay about impersonality of art. The poet and the poem are two different things. So the poet and the poetry created by that poet, these two things are not identical. They are not identical twins. They are two different things. A poet is something, who is creating the poet in a particular way, but a poem created by that poet is entirely different thing. They are not the same thing. The feeling, the emotion and the vision resulting from the poet are something different from the feeling, the emotion and the vision of the poet. So when we read the poem, and what type of feeling, emotion and vision that we are carried to, those things are totally different from the personal feeling, emotion and vision that the poet carried when he or she was writing the poetry. So he brings about a scientific experiment as an example here that we will see in the next slide. So he says that what we are getting as feelings, emotion and visions in a poem, the result when we read that poem, that is totally and that is something different from the feeling, emotion and vision of the poet that he or she carried. A poem is not an expression of the personality but an escape from personality. Please remember this line, okay, and note down. A poem is not an expression of personality, okay, just like we had poems in romantic movement and romanticism, in romantic period, that they'll actually escape to some other land, some other world. Escapism is a trend that was there in romantic movement in the poetry, and also they'll express their own feelings and they'll pour out their own emotions and feelings. It's all about what they felt, what is their emotional side of the experience that they had. But a poem should not be like that. A poem is an expression, is not an expression of the personality of the poet, but it is an escape from the personality. Take the example of Shakespeare. Why Shakespeare is such a great poet? Because after reading his works, after reading especially his drama, you cannot understand what is the individuality of Shakespeare. No, you will get very little understanding about, or little information about the personal feelings of Shakespeare. Maybe we can understand certain tendencies of Shakespeare as well as a literary person, but you cannot understand the Shakespeare's individual taste, feelings and emotion in creating such a character or a situation. So that's what exactly that he means. The feeling, emotion and vision that is there in the poem should be entirely different from the emotion, feeling and vision of the poet. That's how poem and poet, they are two different things. So a poem is not an expression of your personality as a poet, but as an escape from personality. Okay. The creative process illustrated by Eliot, comparing the poet's mind to a shred of platinum when introduced to a chamber containing oxygen and sulfur dioxide. So here he brings about an illustration or an instance, a chemical instance, that you are just like a platinum rod. Your mind, a poet's mind, feelings or emotions, or these things. So inside the mind only you can have these emotions and feelings and visions and all. So the poet's mind, it's just a rod or a shred of platinum. When this platinum got introduced into a chamber or into a test tube containing oxygen and sulfur together, the mix of two gases in the presence of platinum rod will result in the creation of sulfuric acid, yet it has no trace of platinum in it. Just like this, how platinum is indifferent, how the final product is indifferent to the presence of platinum, just like this, a poetry should be indifferent to the emotions of the poet's mind. Like I'll elaborate this example further, that if platinum is introduced to a chamber or a test tube where oxygen and sulfur dioxide together are present, then because of the presence of platinum, sulfuric acid will be created by combining oxygen and sulfur dioxide. But sulfuric acid, the final product, won't have any trace, any tendencies or any characteristics of platinum. We won't understand, we won't get any trace of it, any trace of platinum in sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid has no characteristics or feature of platinum rod. Just like that, platinum here, he says that this shred of platinum or rod of platinum is poet's mind. It is needed to have the final product, just like sulfuric acid. Okay, final product is poetry. So Poet's mind is needed to create sulfuric acid. Combining oxygen and sulfur dioxide, sulfuric acid produced in the presence of platinum. The same way, if poetry need to be present, if poetry need to be created, then poet's mind is needed to be there as a presence, just as platinum did to this experiment of oxygen and sulfur dioxide combining together and forming sulfuric acid. Okay, so it need to be very it need to be, so it is unparticipatory, like platinum just shows its presence, nothing else. It is not combining with the oxygen and sulfur dioxide. The same way, poet's mind is need not to combine with the elements that is there in the poetry, but there should be a need. There is only needed a presence of poet's mind, nothing else. Then the final result of this particular experiment of poetic mind and combining the various things in the presence of poet's mind, the final result will be poetry or whatever artistic form that you need to create. So that will not find any trace of your poetic mind, and that's how poetry or any artistic form should be created. The emotion of art is impersonal. So emotion that you find in an art, it's not that the art will be fully devoid of emotion, devoid of feeling and vision, but there will be, in an art you can find all these things, but emotion and vision and feeling that you can find in art is impersonal, and the artist cannot attain impersonality unless he surrenders himself wholly to the work. So you should, as an artist, you should surrender fully himself or herself wholly to the work. You should surrender yourself to the whole work, yourself wholly to the work. Otherwise, this impersonality cannot be achieved. You should be impartial. You should be just like a platinum rod in that experiment. You should not, mix your traits with the combination of things that is there going on while you are creating poetry. A poet is not likely to know what is to be done with his emotions unless he acquired the sense of tradition. But the poet, inside the poet mind, there will be too much emotions and feelings and visions. So what he or she need to do with all these emotion, feelings and visions? How can he or she handle this? So if you want to acquire a kind of knowledge about how to handle your own emotions, feelings and visions and prevent it to reflect in your poetry, then you need to have a sense of tradition that will be carried out by your sense of tradition. How you need to be impersonal in your own tradition, how you need to be impersonal in your own work of art, that is helped by your own sense of tradition. For that only you need to have tradition. If you don't have traditional sense, then what will happen? The whole emotional feelings and everything will got reflected in your poetry, and that's a kind of spoiled poetry, and that is not falling under the pattern, or that is not fixed to the pattern of literature. And as time goes by, your poetry will get rejected. Your poetry will be just like some fragments of your own emotions, feelings and visions, nothing else. It will be full of your own personality, nothing else relevant will be there. So you need to escape from your own personality while you are creating an artistic work, and this quality can be acquired through a sense of tradition. So guys, that was the important points and a critical summary of tradition and individual talent. So if you have any doubts, mention all those doubts, queries and suggestions in the comment section. I'll be waiting for that, and thank you for the support that so far you have given me. And if not, you can directly WhatsApp me or call me in this number given here, or if you are there in Instagram and following me, you can directly message me there too, and through website too you can reach out to me by messaging from our website. So don't forget to follow me in Instagram. My ID is right here because I don't want you to lose your chance to have all these free materials that I am freely for providing there. And also in a daily basis, I am sharing all this in a daily basis. And you can also join a WhatsApp group that I have mentioned earlier. Go to the description box and click the link and join, or if not, you can directly message and ask me for the link. I'll share the link. You and your friends can join. And if you are studying your own for your net JRF goals, even then visiting my website will help you, that it will give you an idea about how and what all things you need to give prime importance, and what all things and topics that you need to study for your preparations. And that's all about, guys. So thank you for watching this video, and if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe to it if you are interested, because we are simultaneously having two important video lecture series now about literary theory and criticism as well as cultural studies. So these are two important in your MA classes as well as for net JRF English language and literature too. So don't miss the chance of having any of the updates that we are doing here in this website, sorry, in this YouTube channel. So stay tuned to my channel, and thank you for watching this video so far, and let me meet you in the next video lecture. Until then, bye bye and take care.